Today, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get a divorce. Kevin White came with his stepsister, Alana. I didn't argue like I used to. I just quietly handed in the paperwork and signed my name. As I was leaving, I overheard him comforting his stepsister. "Alana, don't blame yourself anymore. She's not really going to divorce me. I've spoiled her too much all these years. Maybe this is a good opportunity to teach her a lesson. Otherwise, you and my son will never have peace." Alana sighed softly. "Kevin, maybe I should just move away with Mason. What if she doesn't calm down after a month and you two really get divorced? Wouldn't I be the one everyone criticizes?" Kevin chuckled. "No way. She's just using this 1-month break to think things over, to threaten me with divorce. You'll see, when that day comes, Tori won't even show up." The wind was strong when Alana stepped out of the car. It blew so hard she staggered a few steps and fell straight into the man beside her. Kevin reflexively reached out, catching her by the shoulders. He looked down and smiled, as if he was about to say something to the woman in his arms, when he suddenly noticed me coming around the corner. In that instant, his face turned cold, and his voice dropped to an icy tone. "Tori, don't get the wrong idea. I just caught her by accident. This is the Civil Affairs Bureau. Try to keep your composure a little." "Let's go." I cut him off curtly and walked straight inside. He seemed momentarily stunned. After all, every time something like that happened before, I would blow up, accusing, yelling at them both, making a huge scene. But soon, I could tell he convinced himself he was right again, because as I entered the lobby, I heard that familiar sigh behind me. In the waiting area, Kevin sat across from me with Alana right beside him. He frowned slightly, looked at me, and said coolly, "I have to take Mason to his interview at the private elementary school later. It was on the way, so I gave them a ride. There's nothing between me and Alana. Don't start imagining ridiculous things." Alana pouted and shot him a teasing look. "Kevin, you usually talk to me so gently. Why are you being so stiff with Tori? Come on, give me a break." Kevin pressed his lips together, saying nothing. "Tori," Alana said softly, "I got out of the car because I wanted to tell you something. After all, we're family. I don't blame you for misunderstanding me before. Marriage isn't easy. Don't let a moment of anger turn into a lifetime of regret." She smiled as she said that. Her face was gentle and elegant, her tone calm and soft, so mild it made people want to believe her. I didn't answer. My eyes drifted past her to the electronic number board behind them. They were calling number 9. I was number 12, 3 more to go. Each number took about 15 minutes, which meant I'd have to wait around 45 more. I silently did the math in my head. "Tori, can you stop being so childish?" Kevin said. "Alana is my sister. At least show her a little respect. Acting like this just makes everyone uncomfortable." I pulled my gaze away from the screen and looked at the two of them. Kevin's brows were furrowed, his expression full of irritation. His eyes carried that same reproach and wariness I'd grown all too familiar with lately. Alana, sitting beside him, gave a small, awkward smile and turned her head away slightly. She was truly skilled at using silence. Sometimes her quietness spoke louder than words. "Then stay there and comfort your sister," I said flatly. For a brief second, something softer flickered across Kevin's face, but his voice tightened as if he were forcing himself to stay calm. "You're doing it again, picking on Alana. Tori, people have to pay the price for their impulsiveness. If you go too far, sometimes there's not even a chance to turn back." His last words carried a clear warning. I looked at him quietly. He really was handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, with a deep, calm voice. There was nothing to criticize about his appearance. In the past, whenever we argued, I used to tease him just to break the tension. "Fine, I'll let you win, just because you're good-looking." Or on those sleepless nights after long, chaotic shifts at the hospital, I'd ask him to talk to me, whisper anything beside my ear, because only his voice could calm me enough to fall asleep. Now, I raised a finger to my lips. "This is a public place. Keep your voice down." In truth, he wasn't speaking loudly at all. I just wanted silence. The divorce procedure went smoothly. I barely said a word, quietly submitting the papers, signing my name, pressing my fingerprint. The divorce agreement was simple. 4 years of marriage, no children. His family's company assets had nothing to do with me. The house, the car, the stocks, the funds, Everything purchased after our marriage would be divided equally. That day, I sat on the living room sofa downstairs and handed Kevin the agreement. He was getting ready to take Alana and Mason to visit their father, who was suffering from Alzheimer's. He only glanced at the document, scribbled his signature without hesitation, then turned and left, slamming the door behind him. No pause, no second thoughts. Just as he always did. Even now, he didn't bother reading anything, just signed and walked away, as if the whole thing was a game he never took seriously. When I stepped out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, the wind still hadn't stopped. Dry leaves swirled across the car. I patiently cleared them off when Kevin's voice came through the wind, faint but familiar. He was comforting Alana again. "Alana, don't blame yourself anymore. She's not really going to divorce me. Honestly, it's a good thing. This month will be a chance for her to adjust her attitude. Otherwise, life for you and Mason would never be easy." Alana's voice was heavy with sorrow. "Kevin, maybe I should move out with Mason. What if she doesn't calm down after a month, and the two of you really end up divorced? Then I'd be the one everyone calls a homewrecker." Kevin laughed softly. "No way. She's just using this 1-month period to think things through. To scare me a little. You'll see, when the time comes, Tori won't even show up." A strong gust of wind suddenly blew past, cutting off the rest of his words. It swept away the last of the leaves on my car, even the thin layer of dust on the surface. I looked up at the sky and murmured, "Nice wind," before getting into the car and driving away. When I returned to the villa, Aunt May was directing the cleaning crew, packing and organizing things. "Ma'am," she said hesitantly, "I don't dare touch this wall. I think we should let a professional handle it. If it gets damaged, that'd be a real shame." It was the photo wall, filled with pictures from the 4 years Kevin and I had lived together. I had chosen every frame myself, planned every position carefully, and even cleaned it every week with my own hands. "Throw them all away," I said without looking up, and went straight upstairs. Aunt May's eyes widened in disbelief. "Ma'am, please don't be upset that I'm speaking frankly, but couples fight all the time. Mr. White treats you so well. If you just move out for a bit to scare him, he'll come running back. After all, you're both women. Don't be too harsh on." Leaning on the railing of the second floor, I looked down at her. "Once you finish packing, you can leave tonight." Aunt May froze. "What do you mean? Where am I supposed to go at this hour?" "I mean you're fired," I said plainly. "As for where to go, Alana is living with Kevin now, in that high-rise apartment. You can go find her." Her face turned pale. "Why should I go to her?" Aunt May looked at me in confusion, her expression full of surprise. "Didn't you and her already become godmother and goddaughter? Why are you coming back to Greenwood Hills this time, and even buying that premium Jinjun Mei tea for her? Logically speaking, she should be the one taking you in now." Her face went pale. "I just felt sorry for her and her child, so I bought some tea as a small gesture, that's all." "Felt sorry for her?" I said coldly. "So you gave her Jinjun Mei that costs more than 10,000 a pound? I gave you 30 million to buy that tea from your hometown. If you only bought the kind that costs 200 a pound for me, then before you leave, make sure you leave the rest of the money behind." Aunt May instantly panicked. "Ma'am, I swear I used all that money to buy tea. I thought we were all family here. No one would care whether it's expensive or not. Besides, Mr. White said he already considers her the lady of the house." I didn't respond. I turned and walked into my room, closed the door, and opened WeChat. Alana had just posted a new status, an elegant photo taken in a high-end restaurant, 3 hands clinking glasses, 2 adults and 1 child. No caption, yet full of implications. Someone commented, "So Mason has a new dad now? Congratulations." Alana replied, "Don't overthink it. Mason just passed his interview." But my eyes focused on the man's hand in the photo. Even though his sleeve covered his wrist, I could still see the faint scar, one I knew too well. It was the scar Kevin had gotten the first time we met, when he shielded me from a knife. 6 years ago, I was still a medical resident working the night shift in the emergency department. That night, a patient's family had caused a scene. One man, furious and out of control, grabbed a knife and lunged at me. In that split second between life and death, an arm reached out, pulling me behind it. Kevin took several cuts to his arm, blood flowing like a stream. When the chaos finally settled, I was shaking as I cleaned and bandaged his wounds. He leaned back in the chair, watching me for a while before smiling faintly. "Little doctor, if you keep trembling like that, I'm afraid I'll bleed out before you're done." I was both grateful and embarrassed. "Thank you, and I'm sorry," I said softly. As he was about to leave, I gathered my courage and called out, "If you're afraid of losing blood, then stop doing stupid things like trying to hurt yourself." There were several small, neat cuts near his wrists, too clean, too deliberate to have been made by that attacker. It was obvious he had come to the hospital that night to take care of those wounds. He looked at me deeply for a few seconds, then said calmly, "You misunderstood. I'm not suicidal. It's just, sometimes the pressure gets too heavy. Pain helps me release it." The excuse was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Of course I didn't believe him. I frowned, keeping my tone stern and professional, trying to make him realize how wrong that was. But instead, he chuckled softly. "All right, little doctor. Thank you for the reminder." After I started dating Kevin White, I learned that he wasn't just handsome, he also had a stable career and considerable wealth. But that never mattered to me. Rich or not, I loved him. That was enough. One time his assistant asked me honestly, "Miss Torres, when you first started dating Mr. White, how did you handle the pressure? It must have been intimidating." I blinked in surprise. "Pressure? He's always smiling, kind, and even risked his life to save someone. What's there to be intimidated by?" The assistant stared at me as if I'd just said something completely absurd. Mr. White, smiling, kind? It wasn't until later that Kevin told me the real story behind that scar on his wrist. That day, after his father was found dead under mysterious circumstances, every so-called friend, business partner, and former associate turned against him. Some even forged contracts his father had signed, turning them into debt papers. The company went bankrupt overnight, drowning in debt. His stepmother left soon after. Kevin was only 19 when he had to shoulder everything alone. For years after that, the pressure back then was so crushing that he could barely breathe. He said he had to find a way to let it out, sometimes in extreme ways because otherwise he truly wouldn't have survived it. Hearing that made my heart ache. "So you used one kind of pain to numb another?" I asked softly. "Kevin, you can't do that anymore. If you ever hurt yourself again, I'll never speak to you again." He pulled me into his arms tightly, his eyes shining with an almost desperate light. "No, I won't. There won't be a next time. When I'm with you, it feels like all the pressure and worry just disappear. Seeing you makes me happy. It makes me smile without even realizing it. Tori, you're the gift God sent me to make up for everything I've lost, aren't you?" Tell me, if a man like that appeared in your life, a man who had been crushed by the world but never gave in, who carried all the weight alone yet rose above it, who loved you, adored you, and gave you all his gentleness and care. A man who looked exactly like the one you used to dream about when you were young, and who also saved your life, could you really not love him? I didn't even have to try. I loved him down to my bones. After we got married, Kevin treated me even better. Because my work schedule was erratic, days and nights, often reversed, sleeplessness a constant, he moved out of his luxury apartment downtown and bought a quiet villa less than 2 kilometers from the hospital, even though that meant he had to spend over 3 hours commuting every day. Whenever I worked the night shift, as long as he wasn't away on business, his car would be waiting right outside the hospital gates when I finished. Once, when I was sent to Beijing for a 2-month training program, he flew there 28 times, sometimes just to have lunch with me. The only regret I had was that, after our marriage, I still hadn't been able to get pregnant. Outwardly, Kevin always said, "Let's just let it happen naturally," but I knew he truly longed for a child. His father, now suffering from Alzheimer's, had forgotten everything, but whenever he saw photos of Kevin as a child, he could still call out his son's name clearly. Kevin used to tell me, if my dad could see a child who looks like I did, maybe he'd remember me again. For so many years I felt completely alone, like I have no real family left. But it's okay now, I have you. And one day, we'll have our own child too. I'll finally have a family again. I grew up in a small town in the South, surrounded by peaceful scenery. My parents both worked for the local government, not wealthy but loving and warm. I was a well-behaved child, good at school, and, as people often said, a pretty little girl. So my life had always gone smoothly. I understood that life came with both joy and sorrow, surprise and regret, that no one's life could ever be perfectly complete. The fact that I couldn't conceive felt like a test from God, and I accepted it calmly. I decided to live more positively, to work harder, to be more grateful. At the hospital, I was always gentle with my patients, caring, patient, and thorough. At home, I loved my husband wholeheartedly, along with the house that I had poured my heart into building piece by piece. I once believed that I could stay that happy forever, until 6 months ago, when Kevin's stepsister, Alana, returned. That night, after a late shift, a heavy rain began to fall. Normally, in a situation like that, Kevin's car would already be waiting for me outside the hospital gate. But that night, not only was he not there, his phone wouldn't connect, no matter how many times I called. Worried something might have happened to him, I didn't hesitate. Holding an umbrella, I hurried through the storm and drove straight home. When I opened the door, I froze. Kevin was sitting calmly on the sofa in the living room, and in the single armchair beside him was a beautiful woman I had never seen before, smiling at me as I stepped inside. That was the first time I met Alana. Kevin saw me standing there drenched from the rain. He hesitated for a second, then immediately walked over to help me take off my soaked coat. "Why didn't you call me to come pick you up?" he asked gently, almost scolding. I glanced at his phone sitting right there on the table. "I did call. You didn't answer." He looked slightly embarrassed and avoided my eyes. I was in a meeting this afternoon and forgot to turn my ringer back on." Alana, sitting on the armchair, curved her lips in a faint smile. When Kevin introduced her as his stepsister, I was genuinely surprised. He had once mentioned having a stepmother. His father remarried when Kevin was 15, and her daughter, 2 years older than him, had moved in with them. They lived together for 4 years before the company went bankrupt. After that, his stepmother left, taking her daughter with her. When he told me that story, his tone had been flat, detached. He never once said her name, not even accidentally. I assumed their relationship was cold and distant, that since they weren't related by blood and hadn't spoken in years, they'd probably never meet again. Maybe that was why he had sounded so indifferent back then. When Alana left that evening, Kevin didn't walk her out. He just sat silently on the couch, head down, his expression distant and unreadable. She didn't seem to mind. Instead, she smiled softly, gave me a gentle hug, and said, "You're beautiful. My little brother is really lucky." After seeing her off, Kevin turned to me and apologized sincerely. I pouted a little and teased him before asking why his stepsister had suddenly come back. His tone was calm, but heavy. "She's been through a lot these past few years. Her mother and husband both passed away, and now her son's ill. She came back to get him treated." I thought of how much she must have endured, losing so many loved ones, and yet still managing to look so graceful, and I couldn't help admiring her. "She must be a strong woman," I said quietly, "but you seemed a little cold toward her today." Kevin was silent for a few seconds before giving a faint, almost bitter smile. "When my father died, her mother divorced him and took all the money with her. I had to survive on my own for a long time after that. The fact that I could sit here calmly and talk to her today is already more than polite." I didn't ask any more questions. I've always believed that if you haven't lived someone else's pain, you have no right to tell them to forgive. That was his past, and he had every right to decide how to face it. Kevin, whom I often called Kev, or sometimes teasingly White, seemed to put it all behind him after that. The next time I met Alana was 2 weeks later. I had just returned from an out-of-town medical conference. Wanting to surprise Kevin, I didn't tell him I was coming home early. The moment I walked into the house, I heard laughter, a woman's voice coming from the kitchen. I followed the sound and found Alana there, busy cooking, while Aunt May stood beside her, helping. In the living room, Kevin was sitting on the floor, playing chess with a little boy around 5 or 6 years old. Several freshly cooked dishes were laid out on the table, and the TV murmured softly in the background. Anyone walking into that scene would have thought, what a warm, happy family. Alana was the first to notice me. "Oh, you're home already?" she said with surprise. Kevin turned his head, froze for a moment, then stood up and came over. Tori, you're back, he said naturally as if nothing was unusual. I swallowed the discomfort rising in my chest, forced a small smile, exchanged a few polite words, and then excused myself, saying I was tired and wanted to rest upstairs. He followed me up, closing the bedroom door behind him. Alana and her son Mason will be staying here for a while, he said quietly. I froze. Staying here? In our house? He looked down, his face showing a kind of helplessness. Mason has a condition, he can't feel pain. There's a specialist at your hospital who's developing a new therapy. Alana brought him back for experimental treatment. She asked if they could stay temporarily. 1, because the villa is close to the hospital. 2, because there's staff here to help. And you're a doctor, so if Mason gets hurt, you'll know how to take care of him. I was stunned. But, I thought you and she didn't get along? Kevin's voice dropped lower, his gaze distant. That was the past. Holding grudges doesn't help anything. Alana, he started to say more, but the way he said her name for the first time since I'd known him made something deep inside me twist painfully. She was the only family member who had ever lived with his father besides him. Kevin said he thought that if Alana spent more time with his dad, it might help improve his condition. Anyway, they're only staying for a few months, he added softly. Tori, I just agreed to it today. I didn't have time to tell you yet. Please don't take it the wrong way. I didn't say anything more. Even though I felt uneasy, what he said made sense. Kevin didn't have much family left, and having a sister like Alana around wasn't necessarily a bad thing. If I made a fuss over it, I'd seem petty. Seeing the guilt in his eyes, I reached out, gently tapped his nose, and smiled. Honestly, I was a little upset at first, I admitted, but it's fine now. He smiled back, relief flickering across his face. At dinner, Alana expressed her gratitude several times. I smiled politely and said, if you ever have questions about Mason's treatment at the hospital, just come to me directly. At the time, I thought it was just a small matter, a temporary arrangement that would last a few months at most. But later, I realized how naive I'd been. I couldn't pinpoint when things began to change. Maybe it started when the glass cabinet that held my carefully arranged figure collection became disorganized, the models pushed aside or broken, replaced by a few toy dinosaurs with missing limbs. Or maybe it began when women's items, scarves, hair clips, folded clothes, started appearing casually on the sofa. Then my spotless white rug, which I always kept perfectly clean, became littered with toys, shredded tissues, and messy crayon marks. And before I knew it, Alana had quietly taken on the role of the woman of the house. I was busier than ever, seeing patients, performing surgeries, and spending more time in the hospital than at home. One evening, after several consecutive operations, I came home utterly exhausted and craving chicken soup, the same dish I always ate when I was tired. I called Aunt May on my way back and asked her to make some. But that night, when I walked into the dining room, there was a large pot of carp soup on the table instead. Where's the chicken soup? I asked. Aunt May answered casually. Miss Alana said Mason wanted fish soup. I figured Mr. White would probably eat out again, so I just made one dish for the few of us here. I stayed quiet for a moment, then said evenly, You know I'm allergic to fish, right? It was only then that Aunt May seemed to remember, her face going pale with embarrassment. Alana lightly patted her on the shoulder and smiled. This was my fault, not Aunt May's. Tori, if you really want chicken soup, I can order some delivery for you right now. Just as she said that, Mason pointed at me and shouted, I hate her. She didn't let me have my soup. She's bad. Kick her out. I swallowed the lump in my throat and reminded myself, Alana was Kevin's sister, and Mason was just a sick child. They'd be gone soon. I could tolerate it, for Kevin's sake. I've never been someone with a colorful, varied life or many hobbies. Ever since I was young, I've lived simply, focusing on one thing at a time. As a child, it was studying. As an adult, it was my career. And after marriage, my entire focus became Kevin. I once told him that living this way might make me less adaptable when things went wrong, but I didn't really believe that. I thought my dedication had always helped me achieve good results in every stage of my life. What I didn't realize back then was that people aren't machines. They're fragile, breakable things. The more night shifts I worked, the less often I saw Kevin's car waiting outside the hospital. The dinners we used to plan in advance were frequently canceled at the last minute because he was too busy. And even during my rare days off, we couldn't spend a full day together because there was always some reason tied to Alana and Mason. Mason couldn't feel pain, so he often got injured without realizing it. Combined with his illness, that made him irritable and defiant. And day by day, I began to feel as if that child's pain, or rather, his lack of it, was slowly being transferred to me. Alana always acted strong and composed, but every so often she would unintentionally let her fragility show, sometimes turning her head with tears shimmering in her eyes, other times locking herself in her room for hours, only to come out later, with red, swollen eyes, smiling as if nothing had happened. That kind of strength on the outside and weakness on the inside made people pity her. It made them want to stand on her side. At the time, I didn't fully understand that. I only knew there was a constant heaviness in my chest, a suffocating pressure I couldn't put into words, like a stone pressing down, painful and stifling. I started finding excuses to stay longer at the hospital before heading home, because sometimes when I walked through that front door, I felt like an outsider in my own house. They were the real family now, not me. One night, while Kevin held me in his arms as we were about to fall asleep, I gently tried to bring it up. "Maybe we should rent an apartment near the hospital for Alana and Mason," I said quietly. "We can cover the rent and even hire someone to help out." He didn't even open his eyes before replying, "No, that's not a good idea. It's too hard for Alana to take care of Mason on her own." I froze. Somewhere along the way he had stopped calling her my stepsister and started saying her name, so softly, so naturally. A week later, I managed to get a rare day off and wanted to spend it with him, but he declined without hesitation, saying it was Mason's birthday and he'd promised to take Alana and her son to the amusement park. A rush of emotions broke through the restraint I had been holding for so long. "I don't agree with this," I said sharply. Kevin turned to me, startled. His expression, calm, unreadable, made my anger flare even more. I finally poured out all the frustration and sadness I had been swallowing for weeks. I thought that after hearing everything, he would realize how much I was hurting. I thought he would feel guilty, that he'd apologize and tell me he'd been wrong. But instead, he looked at me for a long time and said quietly, "Tori, Mason is just a poor child. And Alana, she's had a hard life too. You don't need to be so harsh toward them." I froze, staring at him in disbelief. This was Kevin, my husband, the man who once told me he loved me to the bone. I couldn't understand how someone could stand right in front of you, the same person you'd loved for years, and suddenly feel like a stranger. He sighed then, giving me a patient, gentle smile that somehow made it worse. "All right, Tori, if you really don't want us to go, then we won't. I'll cancel it." When Alana, Mason, and Aunt May, who had been excitedly getting ready to leave, heard that the trip was canceled, disappointment flashed clearly across their faces. The air in the house that day was unbearably heavy. Everyone wore the same expression: helplessness, forbearance, quiet blame. And as I walked through my own home, I felt like I was the one who had done something wrong. But no matter how hard I thought about it, I couldn't figure out what mistake I'd made. The final breaking point came in a way I never expected. I had told myself that if I just endured for 2 more months, it would all be over, that I could go back to focusing on work. I poured every bit of energy into the hospital and finally got the chance to lead a complex surgery, one that would determine whether I'd be promoted to deputy head of my department. I prepared carefully for days, making sure everything was perfect. But on the morning of the operation, after drinking my usual glass of milk, I suddenly broke out in hives. My entire body itched and burned uncontrollably. In that condition, I couldn't even hold a scalpel, let alone perform such an important surgery. I had no choice but to call in sick at the last minute. Holding back the pain, I forced myself to keep my voice calm as I turned to Alana. "Did you touch my milk?" Aunt May was always meticulous with her work. She would never have been careless enough to tamper with my things. Kevin certainly wouldn't have done it either. Alana blinked slowly, her expression unreadable. Then Alana turned to face Kevin and Aunt May. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she spoke slowly, every word heavy and clear. "If I ever intentionally tried to harm Tori, May the heavens strike me down. Let me be hit by a car the moment I step outside and never find peace, even in death. Big tears rolled down her face, but she stood her ground, expression firm and unwavering. I looked over at Mason, who was glaring at me with anger burning in his small eyes. "Mason, did you touch my milk?" I asked. Before he could respond, Kevin's voice thundered. "Enough. Tori, what exactly do you want? Everyone in this house is walking on eggshells because of you. Can't you feel it? Everyone's afraid of upsetting you, everyone is enduring your moods, and now you're accusing a child?" His eyes flashed with frustration. "How did you become like this?" I froze, staring at him in disbelief. "Everyone is enduring because of me? Because of me?" Kevin's gaze was filled with disappointment and exhaustion as he said quietly, "Isn't that true? Tori, why can't you be more understanding toward them? What is it that you really want?" At that moment, I felt my entire body go cold. The itching on my skin vanished. I couldn't feel anything except the chill sinking into my bones. After a long silence, I pointed calmly toward Alana. "You want to know what I want? Fine, I want them to move out of this house." Kevin's expression darkened, his voice growing hard. "Then let me be clear, Tori, that's not happening. I promised they could stay for 6 months, not a day less." I nodded once. "Then we'll get a divorce." The room fell utterly silent. Kevin clenched his jaw. "Tori, what did you just say?" I looked straight into his eyes. I said, "Either they go or we divorce." I had already made up my mind. I was too busy to keep fighting over right and wrong with Alana, too tired to play detective and find proof of who was at fault. All I knew was that this was my home, and I had every right to decide who could stay in it. Kevin said nothing, just stared at me. For a long moment, no one spoke. A flicker of unease passed over Alana's face. Finally, after what felt like forever, Kevin lowered his head and said in a weary voice, "I'll find another place for them." He had given in, but instead of relief, I felt a hollow ache inside. Because I knew he wasn't conceding out of understanding. He was using his love as a bargaining chip. And that realization made me feel sick. Alana's disappointment was obvious, and Mason burst into tears. "I don't want to go. This is my house. It's Mommy's house and Uncle Kevin's house. I'm not leaving." Kevin quickly found a suitable apartment nearby, and the next day, Alana and Mason started packing to move out. Since I was still on sick leave due to the allergic reaction, I had time to think about everything that had happened. I didn't know if what I'd done was right or wrong. Other wives talked about divorce because their husbands cheated, were violent, or had fallen out of love. Kevin wasn't like that. Our fight had started over something so small, just him letting his stepsister move in for a few months. Had I overreacted? Maybe I had. It was just a few months after all. Why couldn't I endure that? But deep down, some quiet, instinctive voice kept telling me that I had to do it. Even if it hurt us temporarily, even if it damaged our marriage, I needed Alana and Mason gone. The sooner, the better. Kevin and I had our whole lives ahead of us. We would have children one day. As long as no one interfered, our love would recover. But then, as I thought about having children, I froze. It suddenly hit me. I hadn't had my period in 2 months. My heart pounded wildly. There were no pregnancy tests left in the house. Overcome with a rush of nervous excitement, I jumped out of bed and was about to head to the pharmacy in the neighborhood when Alana walked in. There was a faint, polite smile on her face. "Before I leave," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you." My eyes drifted, purely by accident, to the pink hair clip she was wearing. It was a hair clip, an old-fashioned one, girlish in style. It didn't suit Alana at all, sitting awkwardly in her neatly styled hair. But what made me freeze wasn't how it looked. It was because I recognized it. Kevin was always sentimental. He kept a small wooden box full of mementos from his youth. Among them was that exact same pink hair clip. Once I had teased him, asking if it was a keepsake from his first love. He had calmly replied that it belonged to his mother. Alana only exchanged a few polite words with me before leaving. So quickly that it almost felt deliberate, as if her only purpose in coming was to make sure I saw that clip. I went out and bought a pregnancy test. When I came back, walking past the study on the 2nd floor, I heard the sound of a woman quietly sobbing inside. Normally, I would have walked away immediately, but the image of that pink hair clip flashed through my mind, stopping me in my tracks. I couldn't help but listen. The door was slightly ajar, and though their voices were low, every word reached me clearly. Kevin, I know we promised each other to forget the past, to live like normal siblings, and to never hurt Tori. Alana's voice trembled between sobs. But still, I can't help it. I feel so wronged. I've done nothing wrong. I've always endured, always backed down, just because I'm your stepsister and she's your wife. Why do I deserve to be treated so unfairly? Kevin, I'm so tired. Sometimes I feel like there's no point in living anymore. Then came Kevin's deep, husky voice. This is my fault. I didn't handle things well and made you suffer. But it'll be over soon. You're leaving tomorrow. Try not to think about it anymore. Alana's sobs quieted, replaced by a soft whisper. Then let me ask you one thing. That night, years ago, do you ever regret it? Kevin didn't respond. You haven't forgotten, have you? If you truly had, then why do you still keep that hair clip I left on your bed? There was a long, unbearable silence. Then in the stillness of that room, I heard his voice again, soft, low, and steady. I never forgot. Not once. It felt like an explosion went off inside my head. Everything around me started spinning, the study door, the railing, the world itself, until it all blurred together. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw Mason standing in the hallway. Get out of my house, he muttered, his voice trembling with anger. Before I could react, he lunged forward, throwing his little arms around my waist. In the next second, we both tumbled violently down the stairs. Thud. 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 I staggered to my feet, dazed, and saw Mason lying motionless on the floor, eyes closed, his small body limp. The door to the study upstairs flew open. Kevin and Alana rushed down the stairs, panic-stricken. Alana dropped to the floor, cradling her son and screaming in anguish, her voice cracking with fury. Tori, we were already leaving. You got what you wanted. Why did you have to hurt Mason? He's just a poor child. No, it wasn't me, it was him. He pushed me. I shouted, but the words barely escaped my throat. My voice came out weak, strangled, almost inaudible. They rushed Mason to the hospital, while I suddenly felt a sharp heat spreading through my lower abdomen. My legs gave out. Blood poured down in a red stream, soaking the floor. My eyes widened in shock, my whole body trembling as I struggled to speak. Kevin, save our baby. I gasped, using every bit of strength I had left. But the sound that came out was barely louder than a whisper. By some miracle, Kevin heard me. He stopped mid-step. I reached out a trembling hand toward him, my eyes pleading for help. But he didn't move. He just stood there looking at me with a cold, hollow expression. Tori, he said finally, his voice low and filled with disappointment. This time, you've really let me down. And then, without another word, he turned away. After saying that, Kevin turned and left, carrying Mason in his arms without once looking back. From that day on, though we lived under the same roof, Kevin and I became strangers. Later, I took out the divorce agreement again, and without the slightest hesitation, he signed his name. That very day, he moved out, returning to his old luxury apartment, taking Alana and Mason with him. When we left the Civil Affairs Bureau, Kevin's mood was dark. He had assumed I wouldn't actually show up that morning. When Alana had cautiously asked if he could give her and Mason a ride to Mason's school interview on the way, he had agreed immediately, barely thinking about it. So when he saw me appear at the entrance of the bureau, his face instantly hardened. One thought crossed his mind. She really came. She was too stubborn, he told himself. And in that moment, he made up his mind. Let her have her tantrum. Let her use this divorce to make a scene. This time, I'll teach her a lesson. But throughout the entire process, I stayed calm. My face was unreadable. I didn't even glance at him once. That quietness frustrated him more than any argument ever had. He felt a hollow kind of disappointment, and underneath it, a slow, burning anger. When we walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, Alana looked downcast and guilty. If I hadn't suggested moving in, she murmured, maybe you two wouldn't have ended up like this. Kevin gave her a half-hearted reassurance, his mind elsewhere. Tori won't actually go through with the divorce, he said absently. She's just angry. I've spoiled her too much, that's why she's using this to threaten me. Are you sure? Alana asked quietly. He paused for a moment, then let out a faint, cold laugh. Of course. Tori could never really divorce me. In the end, all she wanted was to drive you and Mason out of the house. Still, what disappointed him most was how easily those two words, divorce me, had left my mouth. That I'd used them as a weapon against him. Later, at the hospital, Alana had cried bitterly, her voice trembling. "Why is Tori so cruel?" She pushed Mason down the stairs on purpose. Kevin had been shocked. "That's impossible," he argued. "Tori would never do that. Maybe she just lost her temper and pushed a little too hard. They must have both fallen by accident." But after Mason recovered, he clung to Kevin constantly, terrified of being abandoned again. When Alana suggested that they move into his old apartment downtown, Kevin's first instinct was to refuse. But Alana's eyes reddened, and after a long silence, she said softly, "Don't worry, Kevin. I won't be like before anymore." Her voice was gentle, trembling with a fragile kind of restraint, and for some reason, it reminded him of the way she had looked all those years ago. His lips pressed together, but he didn't say no. During the first week of our 1-month divorce waiting period, Kevin buried himself in work, determined not to think about me. He told himself over and over that he couldn't give in, that I needed to learn a lesson. He stayed at the office late every night. But once he got home, he couldn't stop checking his phone. Not once had I called. Not once had I sent a message. I hadn't even posted a single update online. Meanwhile, Mason started throwing tantrums, demanding to go to the amusement park, and shouting that he hated Aunt Tori, claiming that his mom said I never let him go anywhere fun. Kevin frowned and nearly scolded the boy, but then he stopped himself. Instead, he came up with an idea. That day, he deliberately took Alana and Mason out, snapping cheerful, affectionate photos of the three of them. A picture-perfect family outing. He knew Alana would post them online. He wanted her to, because he was sure I would see them. And with how easily I got jealous, how emotional I could be, he thought maybe, just maybe, I'd show up and confront him. But the first day passed. Nothing happened. The second day, still silence. On the evening of the third day, exhausted after work, Kevin came home, went to take a shower, and accidentally walked in on Alana in the bathroom. Startled, she slipped and fell, crying out in pain. "My ankle, it hurts," she said between gasps. Kevin quickly threw her a towel and helped her out. She leaned weakly into his chest, whispering, "I'm sorry. The shower in my bathroom isn't working. I didn't think you'd be home yet, so I just..." Kevin said nothing. He just stood there, his hands still on her shoulders, his heartbeat pounding louder than he wanted to admit. Kevin carried Alana back to her room, gently set her down on the bed, then turned to leave. But her voice, soft, trembling, and familiar, floated from behind him. "Kevin," she whispered, "the truth is, I never forgot either." He froze. She continued, her tone low but steady. "That night, it was the first time for both of us. If only your parents hadn't gone through all that back then, things would have been so different." Kevin stood there, like he'd been struck by lightning. For years he had forced himself not to remember that forbidden, chaotic night from his adolescence, the summer air thick with heat and the endless hum of cicadas outside. He had just finished reading an adult novel that one of his classmates had smuggled to school, his mind a haze of restless, unfamiliar desire, when she, Alana, walked into his room. She had said she couldn't reach her back and asked him to help apply some ointment. That night, the air in the room was heavy with the scent of rose massage oil, and beneath it lingered another strange, intoxicating fragrance, one that stayed with him, faint but inescapable, for more than 15 years after. That scent became the silent reminder of his youth, of everything he wanted to forget but never could. So when Alana reappeared in his life years later, fragile, helpless, in need of comfort, how could he possibly turn her away? After all, he told himself, it was all in the past. She was his stepsister now. Helping her was the decent thing to do. But he hadn't expected Tori to react the way she did. Her fury, her pain, it cut deeper than he'd imagined. The thought of her made him snap out of the fog. He turned, ready to say something to end this, but before he could speak, Alana let the towel slip from her hands. She stood before him completely bare, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Kevin," she whispered, "you've been so lonely all these years. Let me take care of you." For a brief moment, he froze, stunned, furious, and ashamed all at once. "Alana," he roared, "if you ever pull something like this again, get out of here immediately." He spun around and stormed out, his thoughts in chaos. It felt like something long buried in the dark had been ripped open and thrown into the light, ugly, raw, unbearable. Anger and guilt tangled inside him until he could hardly breathe. And then, suddenly, all he wanted was to see Tori. To see her face, to hear her voice, anything to quiet the storm raging inside. He drove straight to the villa. The lights inside were still on. For the first time in days, a strange sense of calm washed over him. Tori always had that effect on him. Somehow she could steady the noise in his heart, soothe his exhaustion, make him feel at peace. Just like the first time they met. He remembered her small hands trembling as she cleaned his wound, her tears falling silently onto his arm, one drop, then another. He'd been strangely mesmerized, counting them under his breath, 7 drops, 8, all the way to 50. He'd been shocked then, wondering how such a small, delicate woman could hold so many tears inside her. She'd been terrified, and yet somehow her fear had awakened something tender in him. For the first time in years, he had made a joke, lightly teasing, almost boyish. If anyone from the office had seen it, they'd have been stunned. But he hadn't felt embarrassed at all. For that brief moment, with her, he'd felt like himself again, like the person he was supposed to be. When she had left that night, frail like a reed swaying in the wind, she'd still straightened her back, pretending to be firm as she told him not to do anything stupid. He had been shaken by her courage, her empathy, her warmth. Of course, she had misunderstood. He'd never intended to take his own life. The cuts on his wrists had been something else, a desperate, reckless attempt to release pressure he couldn't contain. But she hadn't believed him. Her dark, earnest eyes had stared into his, unblinking. And then he had laughed, a quiet, genuine laugh that had startled even him. "Thank you for the reminder, Doctor," he'd said softly. Now, standing outside her door years later, he punched in the familiar code to her keypad, only to find it had been changed. For a moment, he just stood there, unable to move. The rejection hit harder than he expected. Had she changed it to keep him out? He pulled out his phone and called her. It rang twice before she hung up. He tried again, another hang-up. Then a WeChat message appeared on his screen, 3 simple, cold words that cut sharper than anything she'd ever said aloud. "What's the matter?" Kevin let out a long sigh and began typing the message he'd already rehearsed in his mind. "I came to get my pajamas. You know I can't sleep without them." There was no reply from me. He waited, thinking maybe I was walking to the door. Maybe I'd finally open it. But instead, another message popped up. "In the box outside the door. Find it yourself." Kevin frowned. He glanced around the entryway and noticed several cardboard boxes stacked beside the door, things I'd planned to throw out but hadn't gotten around to yet. He opened a few of them at random, and sure enough, found his clothes, wrinkled and shoved carelessly into one of the boxes. Anger surged through him. That I could treat his belongings this way, it felt like an insult. What was I thinking? When he came back, what was he supposed to wear? But then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something else. A pile of photo frames, 10, maybe more, piled haphazardly in the corner. He squinted, recognizing them immediately. It was the photo wall. The one I had spent hours arranging, cleaning, treasuring. Now it lay dismantled, the frames bent, glass cracked, corners chipped, dumped carelessly as if they meant nothing. He stood there, frozen. A flood of emotions hit him all at once. Anger, frustration, and something deeper. Something that felt almost like grief. Everything he'd worked so hard to preserve, everything he thought we had built together, it was as if I had stomped on it without a second thought. He clenched his fists, turned around, and walked away, each step heavier than the last. When he returned to the apartment, Alana was sitting on the sofa, staring blankly into space. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed, and full of quiet sorrow. Kevin's jaw tightened as he approached her. For a moment he stood there silently, then slowly reached out his hand. Her lashes trembled. Then with a soft sigh she tilted her head and leaned her cheek into his palm. "Kevin," she whispered. They didn't do anything that night. He simply sat down beside her and she curled into his chest. They held each other, wordless, and fell asleep like that, 2 people, both wounded, both seeking comfort. Kevin told himself he had been through enough. He was tired too. He deserved to be comforted for once. In the days that followed, he took a leave of absence from work. He brought Alana and Mason everywhere, on outings to fancy restaurants, on shopping trips for expensive handbags and jewelry. Whenever Mason had to go to the hospital, Kevin insisted on accompanying him personally. Alana often posted pictures online, smiling, warm, domestic, like a family that had always belonged together. During that time, Kevin and I crossed paths twice. The first was in the hospital corridor. Kevin was holding Mason's hand. Alana was on his other side, limping slightly in her high heels. Out of instinct, Kevin had placed his arm around her shoulders to steady her. When he looked up, he saw me walking toward them, alone, hands in my coat pockets, face calm and unreadable. He stopped in his tracks, lips tightening. I glanced at them briefly, my expression flat, then walked right past without a word. The second time was at a Western restaurant. Mason had wanted steak, so Kevin had brought them there. As they were getting ready to leave, he saw me walk in with another man. We sat down by the window. Kevin froze, watching us. Then, unable to stop himself, he approached. "Tori," he said coldly, his tone sharp and mocking. "Aren't you going to introduce us?" I frowned slightly but didn't answer. Seeing my face again, so familiar, so close, made his heart skip painfully. For one fleeting moment, he wanted nothing more than to tell me, "Tori, stop being angry. Come home with me." But before he could speak, Alana's soft voice came from behind him. "Kevin, Mason's sleepy. Let's go home." Then she noticed me, her expression one of polite surprise. "Oh, Tori, what a coincidence." Her gaze flicked to the man sitting across from me, assessing him quickly. "And this is?" The man, calm and composed, turned slightly toward Kevin and said, "You must be Tori's ex-husband." Kevin's eyes darkened. "We're not divorced yet," he said icily. "So technically I'm not her ex. And you are?" The man smiled lightly. "I'm the one who's pursuing her, and I sincerely hope the two of you finish your divorce soon." Kevin let out a bitter laugh, more out of rage than amusement. He turned to me, his voice low and cutting. "So eager, huh?" I lifted my head and met his gaze squarely. "Yes," I said evenly. "Very eager." The man beside me chuckled softly, and that quiet sound seemed to shatter whatever restraint Kevin had left. His face hardened. Without another word, he turned and walked out with Alana and Mason. After the three of them disappeared beyond the doorway, I turned to look at the man sitting across from me. I stared helplessly at the man sitting across from me. "Really, Andrew? You're joking like this now?" My senior, Andrew, the one I had called Sue Ween since med school, smirked faintly. "What? I saw people pull this kind of surprise in short comedy sketches all the time. I didn't realize it actually feels kind of fun in real life." I could only give a weary laugh. "This is your farewell dinner before you move overseas. Our friends will be here any minute. If you keep joking like that, you'll scare someone to death." Meanwhile, Kevin sat several tables away, drunk out of his mind. His chest felt hollow, and no matter how much he drank, he couldn't fill the emptiness spreading inside him. These past few days, he had been deliberately acting close to Alana and Mason, taking them out, letting Alana post happy photos online, hoping that I would see them, get jealous, and come to him. He'd imagined I would swallow my pride, show up, maybe even apologize. But instead, while he was carefully staging all of that, I was out having dinner with another man. What unsettled him most wasn't the dinner. It was the moment he saw me laugh. That open, genuine smile on my face. I hadn't smiled like that at him in so long. Ever since Alana had moved in, my laughter had faded bit by bit, until there was nothing left of it. Kevin felt a bitterness so sharp it almost hurt physically. He couldn't understand what he had done wrong, how things between us had crumbled into this mess. When he woke up the next morning, he found himself lying in bed at home. The faint sound of running water came from the bathroom. On the nightstand beside him lay a familiar pink hair clip. He froze. His mind replayed broken, blurry flashes from the night before, moments that seemed to overlap with a memory he had spent years trying to bury. Then, like lightning striking his chest, realization hit him. His whole body went cold. He threw on his clothes in a panic and rushed out of the apartment, almost running. No, it couldn't be. He loved Tori. He could never have done something like that. Even drunk, no, especially drunk, it was impossible. He wandered through the city in a daze, not knowing where he was going until he found himself standing outside the hospital gates. And there, through the blur of exhaustion and disbelief, he saw me. I was with several other doctors, helping a patient just rushed in from an ambulance. Suddenly, the patient broke free from the stretcher restraints, grabbed a piece of equipment, and hurled it toward the team. I was bending down at that moment, completely unaware. Kevin didn't think, he just lunged forward. and then everything went dark. When he woke up 2 days later, he was in a hospital bed. I was sitting beside him, sunlight streaming through the window, lighting up my face. For the first time in months, I looked calm, almost radiant, the same as the girl he'd first fallen for. Emotion surged through him, tightening his throat. "Tori, as long as you're okay, that's all that matters." I smiled softly. "I'm fine. How are you feeling?" When he saw that smile again, Kevin's eyes grew hot. These past months he had felt like a ghost drifting through life without purpose. But in that moment, seeing my face again, he finally felt grounded, at peace. He forced a weak smile. "Don't worry about me, I'm fine. Really." Maybe it was the medication, but soon after, he drifted back to sleep. Through the haze, he heard the nurses whispering outside his room. Unbelievable. The object wasn't even aimed at anyone, but he just threw himself in the way. I heard he called out Dr. Tori's name right before it happened. Guess he was trying to save her. But she was standing the farthest away. She wasn't even in danger. Now look, no one else got hurt, and he ends up hospitalized. Kevin didn't respond, just kept his eyes closed. The only thought in his head was that he'd saved me again. No matter what happened, that had to mean something. It had to mean we could start over. When he was discharged, he felt almost euphoric. I stayed by his side through the entire process, helping with paperwork, picking up his medicine, driving him home. My tone was gentle, my actions careful and composed. In the car, Kevin turned to me, speaking as if the past could simply be erased. "Tori, we've both made mistakes before. I'm sorry. Let's try to cherish each other from now on." After all this, I've realized how precious life really is. I've thought it through. I'm going to take a long break from work. I want to focus completely on us. Maybe even start a family. The sharp screech of the brakes cut through his words. The car came to an abrupt stop beneath the high-rise apartment building. "Tori," he said with a bitter smile, "you're still not letting me go back to the villa, are you?" I didn't answer. I lowered my gaze, reached into my bag, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, handing it to him without a word. Kevin frowned, glancing down. It was a medical report, a pregnancy diagnosis. The patient's name read Tori White. The examination date was 2 months ago. His eyes widened, his voice trembling with sudden joy. "Tori, is it true? You're pregnant? I'm going to be a dad?" I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, my voice calm and faint like a breeze. "I was." He froze. "There was a baby," I said softly. "But the baby wasn't lucky. It only existed in this world for a very short time. The day the mother fell down the stairs, the baby was gone." My tone remained even, but each word cut deeper than any scream could. If the father had taken the mother to the hospital in time, there might still have been hope. But that day, the baby's father chose to save another child instead. Kevin's whole body began to tremble. "And before I fell down the stairs," I continued, "I heard you talking to Alana. You told her you'd never forgotten." My voice was quiet, distant, as if coming from somewhere far away, but it pierced through flesh and bone, sinking deep into the marrow. Alana really was a strong woman. Despite everything that had happened, she kept up a cheerful face, always documenting her daily life. The harmless parts went on social media for everyone to see. The rest, the private, intimate parts, she sent directly to me. Kevin's face drained of color. He turned sharply toward me, jaw clenched so tightly the veins in his neck stood out. "Pictures of you," I said quietly, "sleeping in her arms all night, or the video of the two of you together before your accident." His knees gave out. A broken sound escaped his throat, half sob, half groan. "Stop. Please, stop. Don't say any more, Tori." I turned to him, my eyes calm, steady. "Kevin, tomorrow marks the 30th day of the divorce waiting period. I've done everything I could these past weeks, took care of you, made sure you healed, so that today you'd be well enough to leave the hospital." I paused, my tone unwavering. "Because tomorrow I want you there. Don't be absent." That day, Kevin returned to the apartment like a man stripped of his soul. Alana rushed forward and threw her arms around him. "Kevin, whatever she said, it's all lies. She just wants revenge on me and Mason. I'm your sister, Kevin. Aside from Dad, I'm the only family you have left." Kevin didn't push her away. He just stood there, his face empty, his voice flat and cold. "Take Mason and leave. Now. If you don't, I don't trust myself to stay calm." He exhaled slowly. "I can't make a scene. I told Tori I'd cooperate with her to finish this properly tomorrow. It matters to her, and I won't let her down again." Alana stared at him, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. After a long silence, she took Mason by the hand and left. When the divorce was finalized, Kevin couldn't bring himself to see me again for a long time. He didn't have the courage. He knew I didn't want to see him, and deep down, he couldn't forgive himself either. But one sleepless night, unable to bear it any longer, he went to the villa. When he got there, he realized it had a new owner. I had sold it. The home we'd built together was gone. Kevin offered an enormous sum to buy it back, and once he did, he started living there alone, haunted by memories, numbing himself with alcohol, drifting through fantasies of a life that no longer existed. He would lie awake, imagining the child who never got to be born. Boy or girl, it didn't matter. In his mind, the baby had bright, clear eyes, just like mine, the day he first met me. 3 months after the divorce, Alana appeared again, this time with Mason by her side. Kevin was lying on the bed that used to be mine. When he opened his eyes, they were standing in the doorway. Alana's eyes were red, her voice trembling. "Kevin, the new treatment for Mason, it's finally showing results, but it's expensive. Can you help us?" He sat up abruptly, expressionless, and grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the door. His movements were sharp, almost violent. "Kevin, wait," she cried, stumbling, unsteady and shaken. Mason, terrified, lunged forward and bit down hard on Kevin's arm. Kevin shoved hard, and Mason fell backward, hitting the floor and losing consciousness. Alana's eyes went wide with shock as she screamed, "How dare you? How could you lay a hand on my son? How could you treat a child like that?" But Kevin could no longer hear her words clearly. In his mind, only one thought pounded again and again. He had to get this woman out of his house, out of his life. Alana tried to pull away, but he held her too tightly. She looked down at her unconscious son and began to scream and sob like a woman possessed. "You deserve this. All of it, you and your whole cursed family," she shrieked, her voice raw. "Your father said he wouldn't leave us a penny, so I switched his medication after his stroke. That's why he turned into that senile old fool. That's your family's karma." Kevin froze, staring at her in disbelief, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Alana's voice cracked, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she struggled to speak. The commotion drew the attention of the building's security. Someone began pounding on the door from outside. Kevin blinked, as if waking from a trance. He released her and stumbled backward, collapsing onto the floor. Mason was still unconscious, but his fingers twitched faintly. Slowly, the boy's lips parted and he whispered weakly, "You pushed me, didn't you?" Then his eyes rolled back, and he fell completely limp. Kevin White was sentenced to 1 year in prison for intentional injury. Alana came to the detention center with a document, a statement of forgiveness. She said she'd sign it if he paid her 10 million yuan in compensation. Kevin didn't give her a single cent. He only said quietly, "Fine, everything that's happened, it's exactly what we deserve." Alana broke down, screaming, "And what about Mason? What about us? How are we supposed to live?" Kevin closed his eyes and turned away, refusing to look at her again. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, I officially began my 2-year term as a volunteer doctor in Equatorial Guinea. One afternoon, I received a video call. On the screen, Kevin looked like a completely different person, his hair cropped short, his body gaunt, cheekbones sharp and hollow. He spoke seriously, his voice hoarse with regret. He apologized, recounting every detail of what had happened, everything he had done. I listened in silence, not interrupting once. "I can't even imagine what you went through," he said, his voice trembling. "That day on the stairs. I don't know how you survived that pain. And now, there's no one left in my life. No one. I don't know how to live with what I've done, Tori." I looked at him quietly through the screen, my tone calm and steady. "I know that feeling. Even when you can keep moving forward, healing still takes time. The pain doesn't just disappear, you have to dissolve it into something bigger than yourself. That's what I've been doing, using a wider world to make my pain smaller. I hope. Maybe that can help you too." When the call ended, I turned around and found Andrew, my senior, standing behind me. He scratched his head awkwardly. "Sorry," he said with a sheepish grin. "You were speaking Chinese so loud, I couldn't help overhearing. Not that anyone here could avoid it even if they wanted to." Then his expression shifted, his brows drawing together. "But seriously, you've got some nerve. You had a miscarriage less than 2 months ago, and you still volunteered to come to a place this rough? It's a miracle nothing's happened to you. I smiled faintly. I didn't have a miscarriage. He blinked in surprise. I was just late. I thought I was pregnant at first, I explained, a little helplessly. Later I kept the lie going. It made the divorce process easier. Andrew raised an eyebrow. So that was your plan all along, a fake pregnancy? I sighed. After everything I went through, didn't I deserve at least one chance to strike back? He stared at me for a moment, then suddenly burst out laughing. You see, those short dramas you always criticize, they're spot on. I told you watching them was satisfying, and you disagreed. Now look at you, living one out yourself. How's that for irony? I couldn't help smiling. My gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the African sun was sinking into the vast, quiet savanna. If it's not bright in the east, I murmured, then it will shine in the west. The world was so big. How could there be any pain that couldn't eventually be overcome? And with that thought, I knew this chapter of my life had finally come to an end.